Hi, so this is the tutorial for building the zeptocade. I'm going to walk you through the process. The whole build takes about 2 hours and it's a somewhat technical build. And I'll have it go fast when I'm not explaining things, but when I explain things, I'll pause and slow down and let you know what I'm doing. So here we go. All right, so first we're going to grab all of the LED buttons out of the box. There's going to be about 25 buttons. And there's one example button I'm showing here. This example button shows how you're going to solder on the adapter piece. You only need 20 buttons for the zeptocade, but I included extras just in case some buttons have some problem with sticking. I found that a random assortment, probably around 2% of them, have a sticking problem, and I just throw those buttons away because there's not a really good way to fix them. So if you do have that problem, just use one of the extra buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and set all of these buttons aside and then get ready to solder them. Okay, so before soldering, you're going to need some 1x4 pin male headers. So you can just take a female piece and then the male headers and break off 1x4 pins. You're going to need 20 of these at least, maybe make 25. And it may be that I have supplied some 1x4s, but if you don't have the 1x4s, just break them off and then they're easy to make. So go ahead and make a bunch of those. Okay, so now that you have the 1x4 male headers, we're going to solder the adapters for the LED buttons onto them. Every LED button is going to have this little adapter, and the adapter has 4 pins, and we're going to solder the 1x4 male headers so that the long legs are sticking out from the side with the numbers. You can see that here. Basically, a little trick for this is to take those 1x4 male headers and put them into a female header that you have laying around. I have this little piece right here, so I just pop them in, and then place each adapter on top of the male header so the numbers are facing away from you, and then solder the other side. So go ahead and make about 25 of these. We only need 20, but just in case something happens to one of them, it's good to have a few extra on hand. And if you are at all confused, make sure to check the example one that was sent with the other ones. There should be one example one with some male headers attached. Okay, so now that we have the adapters for the buttons, we're going to start soldering the adapters to the buttons. So the adapters have some numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the buttons have 2 long leads and 2 short leads. So the number 1, 2 will go in the long leads, and 3, 4 will go on the short leads. There's an example LED arcade button that you can look for how to do this. And the biggest thing to make sure is that the shorter leads are somewhat flush with the adapter. And the longer leads, you'll notice, kind of stick onto the adapter a little more. That's intentional, because if you bend the shorter leads, the button will not press well. So you can see I'm testing how well it presses. If you bend those shorter leads, the button will likely get more stuck. So the way that you do this is to put on the adapter with the first basically getting it on the longer leads, so number 1 and 2, and they're a little bit smaller holes so that they'll kind of stick onto those leads pretty easily. And there's big holes for the shorter leads, and the big holes ensure that you don't bend them, and you can put this adapter on without kind of manipulating or bending the position of those shorter leads. And then you put it on and kind of make sure everything is aligned, perpendicular and parallel to the surface of the arcade button. And once you have it on, it'll kind of stay there and you can start soldering. And what you want to do is first solder the longer leads, just keeping sure that it's staying parallel and that you have the shorter leads just barely coming out from the top. And solder those longer leads and then solder those shorter leads, keeping everything situated. And if all is good, after you solder, the button will still be able to be pressed without sticking. So here you can see I soldered the longer leads, and now I'm going to solder the shorter ones. There's one, and then we'll solder the other one. And you can see it kind of pools, and that's totally fine. As long as it pools and touches the shorter lead, it's totally fine. It may pool on the top side or the bottom side or both sides. As long as it's touching, it should be okay. And let's see if I can see this. Yeah, so you can see that it's soldered those two shorter ones now, and everything's parallel. That's sort of out of focus, but you can just check the example one to get an idea, and just make sure that it still presses. Some of them, no matter what you do, will not press. And you can see here if I bend those male headers, it will push against the shorter leads and make it difficult to press. So it's really important to keep things perpendicular and not put a lot of tension as you're soldering these. The taller leads, it doesn't matter how much tension you put on them, but the shorter ones, it's very important to kind of make it less tension on them as you solder. So now I'm going to solder up the other 20 or so, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so this part is a lot easier. You're going to grab the 8 potentiometers, or 7 potentiometers. One is an example potentiometer, which shows how this is going to be done. So here's the example. We're going to solder an adapter to a 1x3 male header pin, and then we're going to solder the adapter to the potentiometer 3 prongs. And this is pretty straightforward. It's kind of like the other adapter. Get a surface like a female header, and then we're going to, unless already supplied, we're going to make some 1x3 male headers just by pushing them into a female header and then pulling out 7 male ones, and then we're going to solder. Now that we have all these 1x3 male headers, you can put them into a female header to hold things. And following the example, we're going to first solder 3 of the pins of the adapter into the male header. And it doesn't matter which side you do this, either side, it doesn't matter. The numbers can be on the top or numbers can be on the bottom. And once those pins are soldered, you can take a potentiometer and put those 3 prongs into the adapter and then solder those. And unlike the arcade button, here there's really no harm in how you put them in any way you can, and then go ahead and solder them. It is nice if you can keep things sort of parallel, but don't worry about it too much. So go ahead and solder all of those. Okay, so once you have all the potentiometers and all the arcade buttons soldered, we're going to work on the front plate. The front plate, you can see there's 2 diodes that we're going to solder. So let's do those first. So just grab the 2 diodes and then pay attention to the line on the diode. The line on the diode should correspond to where it shows a line on the front panel. So just go ahead and bend those legs, and then you can slip those through, and then just watch and see there's that small line on the bottom side, and that aligns well with the line on the diode. So there's 2 of them. Go ahead and put them in and then solder. All right, this part is going to be unessential for everyone because I will be supplying 20 by 1 female headers, but I currently only have 10 by 1s. So what I'm doing right now is just shaving off a little bit of the plastic so they will stick in better. So you can ignore this shaving part. I'm just showing it here for posterity. With the female headers with the long legs, stick the first set in to the bottom side. It'll be easier if you do this one side at a time, and then stick a pico chip on top to hold it there. That'll make sure that it kind of stays perpendicular to the front plate. And now what we're going to do is we're going to solder the back side. So you can see these pins are sticking out, and we want to just solder the very base of the pin. And one little hint here is that there's circles and that there's squares. If you look really closely, some of the pads are circles and some of the pads are squares. The squares are grounds and the circles are just regular signal. The square ground ones are very hard to solder. So I would suggest first doing all the circles, and the squares, you just need a tiny bit of solder. It doesn't heat up very well, so it's hard to put solder onto it, but don't worry about it too much. It's just a ground. So if you don't get too much solder on one of them, at least one of them will have enough solder to ground the plate. The other ones it's more important to be very succinct and make sure that you just get enough solder and it doesn't touch the neighboring pins. Otherwise, you could short the board. And just make sure not to heat up too much, because heating up too much could cause one of the tines to fall out of the plastic piece. So just be cautious and careful and try to solder slowly. And then once you do the one side, do the same thing on the second side. Once you're done soldering those female header pins, you can leave the chip plugged in and we can plug in the back of the zeptocore. So the zeptocore will essentially just sandwich onto that top plate. I'm just checking to make sure they're all pretty well aligned, and then you'll take the zeptocore and then just push it into all of those pins. It won't go all the way through, that's totally fine. Just push it in as far as you can, not too tight, and the potentiometers will stick through and it will stay pretty solid right there. And that will be the working zeptocore. Final thing is to solder these 5-pin header. I just pointed it out. So there should be, if not included, just chop one of the male headers into a 1x5 pin and solder that on to the last spot, sort of on the bottom of the zeptocore. So now that we have that soldered on, we're going to go to the bottom plate for a little bit and just get that prepped. So spill out all the potentiometer covers and the standoffs, and let's grab that bottom plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of those standoffs on first. So go ahead and just push them through and then screw in the standoff onto the bottom plate. And there's 6 of them, and they're made so that they'll keep the position just perfectly so that the LED buttons have enough room and not too much room that they're pushed out. Yeah, so we'll screw all of those in. And there's all these male headers on this bottom plate because we're going to be connecting these cables like this one. I'm just showing a preview now. And that cable is going to connect directly in the same direction onto the top plate. And I'm just showing this for now. Let's go and do the potentiometers first. Now let's put in the potentiometers. Each potentiometer has a little nut, and we're going to unscrew that with a 10mm wrench. So take a wrench, and let's do this one at a time. It's better to do this one by going on the left side down, so the first column and then the second column. Take off the wrench and the spacer, put the potentiometer through, and then put the spacer and the nut back. So I'm putting these on, and you can see that the male header is basically parallel with the top of the board. This is ideal. Once you have them on somewhat tight, use your backhand and tighten them and keep the back in the same position. Don't over tighten here, just enough, and make sure it's turned all the way counterclockwise. That'll make it easier later. And then do the whole column, and then we'll put on the caps. Now let's put on the caps for the first row. So I like to do Roy G. Biv, so we'll start with red. And essentially these caps have a little tiny pin in the back, a set screw, and you're going to just tighten that just enough so that you can get the cap on, and we'll orient it and then tighten it. I like to orient all of my potentiometers so that they're all turned fully counterclockwise, so that I know that the cap needs to face basically bottom left. And so I set that up, and once it's in place, I set the screw on that one. And it's easier to just do the first column because you'll see that you'll be in the way of the others if you do the right column first. So I do the whole first column left going top to bottom, and then the right column going bottom to top. After you have all the potentiometers on, we're going to connect the top plate to the bottom plate. This is a little bit tricky, but just keep in mind that you basically want to connect things straight down, straight from the bottom to the top. So you can see that I have this 5-pin cable, and I'm first connecting it from the 5-pin header on the bottom plate. There's 3 5-pin headers. You can connect to any 3 of them. They're all the same. And then you connect it from the bottom to the 1x5-pin header on the top plate. So just like this. And you can see it just goes straight from the bottom to the top. Use the colors to kind of align things. And now we're going to connect all the potentiometers. So each of them is connected by a 3-pin female to female. And you can see that this is the same thing. It's going straight from the bottom to the top. So we want, if orange is on the right, on the bottom plate, we want the orange wire to be on the right, on the top plate. And I'm going from the first, so this is the first row, first column, to the first row, first column of the potentiometers when you look to it from the top, just like this. And it's good to just double check it, make sure that you have the same order. So this was orange brown, or sorry, orange red brown, and it's orange red brown on the top plate too. If you mess that up, you may get a little short, or the pico basically just won't start and it'll be resetting over and over. It's easy to fix, so no problem if you make a mistake, but it's good just to double check because there's a lot of wires and you'll have to check them all if there is a little problem. So just go slow and make sure that when you connect it, that the color on the outside is the same as the color on the outside on the top plate and the bottom plate. And just press them in so they're nice and snug. When you close the plates together, they basically won't go anywhere. They'll be nice and snug. And you can see that there's not a lot of room. So just keep the top plate kind of at a 90-degree angle next to the bottom plate, and you can just connect them through. And sometimes you have to just finagle them a little bit, but it works just fine connecting them. Just go one at a time. Go do the first column top to bottom, and then do the second column top to bottom. That's it for the wiring of the top and the bottom plate, and now we're going to basically smash the plates together. You want to push the wires so that they're going to be away from the arcade buttons. So you see what I did there? I pushed that wire away so it's on the bottom of the zeptocore. And you want to do the same for the potentiometers because they'll get in the way of the arcade buttons. But otherwise, you don't really need to worry about where the wires land. Just smash them together and they'll be just fine. Just keep them inside so you don't have to really mess around with them. And then once you've got them kind of pushed together, you can get um, the top of those standoffs and screw those in. You can screw in all 6 at this time. It'll make it a little bit easier, but it's very easy. If you ever need to fix something, it's easy just to unscrew them, pop those plates apart, and then fix whatever you need to fix. Now let's put in the arcade buttons. So the arcade buttons have these white collars, and we're going to take off the collar and then put the collar inside the zeptocade. We're going to start at the middle and go to the outside. So grab one of the positions. So this is C1, and take a look at the adapter. The adapter is going to go in, so there's a white part on one side of the adapter. So you see there's that white part. The white part is going to want to face the left side. So we're going to press that in, and we're going to make sure that it sits in, those 4 pins sit into the 4 female headers. And you can't see right now, but I'm basically just screwing in that collar after getting it sitting in those 4 female headers. I'll do another one that hopefully is easier to see. But now I'm just screwing it in, not totally tight. I'm having some trouble screwing this one in actually. You don't want to get it super tight because you don't want the button to stick, because if you get it super tight you could create tension in the connection and that will make the button a little bit sticky. And there's some buttons that are just very sticky. So you can see here, and I got the collar on and I'm just tightening it up a little bit and testing out the button to make sure that it still presses okay, and continuing to, yeah, press and then tighten. You really don't want this very tight. I'm just having a lot of trouble putting this one on. And let's do the next one. So the next one will be on the to the left of that, because we want to start at the center and go out, because it's very hard to go back to the center to get your fingers through the board actually. So go ahead and take the collar off and then check the adapter, make sure the white part of the adapter, or put the collar in, make sure the white part of the adapter, see here, is facing the left side of the board. And then push that in so those 4 pins go directly into those female headers. And make sure all 4 of them are in there. And then it's easy, I think, to turn the board upside down and use gravity to help. Yeah, this one's a lot easier to help get that collar onto the arcade button and then screw that on. And again, don't screw super tightly. You don't want to create some tension. Just make sure you screw it enough that it doesn't bounce around and that you still have some springiness in the button. And we're going to test the buttons later. So if you have any problems, now, you'll have problems later. But if you don't have problems now, you could have problems later, but we will fix that once we plug everything in. And one thing you could do actually is you could plug it in at this point and then see that they're lighting up and that they're responding to touch. I do that sometimes, but in this case, I'm just going to put all of the buttons in and then I'm going to test. So here's the outside. So I just go row by row, do the first 2 middle ones, and then do the outside ones, and just go row by row. And it gets easier as you do this. Getting the collar on is a little funky in the beginning, but it does get easier and easier. And put the collar on. Always make sure that that white part is pressed in and it's facing the left side of the zeptocade. Otherwise, these things will be in backwards and they will not work. So that's the first row. Go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and quickly do the other rows now. this is the home stretch now. So right now I'm just testing, pressing all the buttons, make sure that they feel okay. And they feel pretty good. Turn it on just to make sure that they're flashing. Looks like they're all flashing. Already looks like maybe one of them is a little bit stuck. You see that one key there. Before I go on though, I'm just going to make sure I have the latest firmware. So I'm going to turn it off and go upload the latest firmware. Now I have the latest firmware. I'm going to plug it in so I don't use all the battery. And now I'm going to test, turn it on and see that it's moving, turn all the knobs, make sure they do stuff. All is good here. And now I want to kind of play around and see if there's any stuck buttons. So I'm just pressing buttons to make sure that they press and that they don't get stuck too much. So here's one I already found that's a little bit sticky. And I'm going to go ahead and replace it with a different one to see if that just fixes the problem. And it looks like that did, so I'm just going to keep this button. So like I said, some of the buttons for whatever reason get bodged somehow, maybe in the adapter or the button itself. I've had several buttons come from the manufacturer just broken. Here's another stuck one. And this one's kind of in the middle of the board, so it's a little more annoying. What you have to do is take out the outermost one, and then you can take out that one. And again, here I'm just going to replace it with another button. I threw that one away. And here's a new button that was same button, or a different button, but same adapter kind of scheme. And I plugged that one in, plugged in the outermost one again, and now it seems to be working pretty well. Checking all the buttons, make sure they light up and that they feel good. This one now feels a little bit weird. So let's take that one out, try replacing it, see if that fixes it. Yeah, so this board actually probably worse than the other boards I've had where most boards I've done, they don't have any problems, but this one has got a couple of buttons. So 3 buttons need to be fixed, but now it feels great, looks great, and it sounds great though you can't hear it. So good luck and let me know if you have any issues.